So at any given time, schedule that. It's a different issue. We're going to talk about peonies today. There's a couple of fun facts of peonies I'm going to talk about. How to prepare your soil, what they like, what they don't like, why they may not be blooming, if you already have them. And, because it's one plant today, I can't stay on that. So you have to forgive my tangential teaching style, because I'll go down a couple of rabbit trails that will allow you to be more successful if you can track with me, right? So the peony is centuries old. Marco Polo actually recorded seeing them in China as a rose the size of a cabbage. And that most likely was a tree peony, which is the flower will continue to get bigger as it's old. So it will truncate in a tree, and the flower will continue to grow. A couple of peonies that are easier to grow here, or I should say easier to find, are the Ito and what's called the herbaceous, just the bush that is, they're both herbaceous. The Ito, that's a gentleman's name. Well, I don't know that that's a gentleman's name, it's an individual's name. A scientist, a cultivar, that was able to shave off. The only way that he was able to cross these was he was using root shavings and grafting them and finally getting a taller, what's in between the bush and the Ito. I mean, in between the bush and the tree. In your pruning on when they come up like this, don't cut them off thinking you're going to get thicker. This is one of the plants that doesn't work that way. Deal with what you have. The number of stalks that comes up and the virility of those stalks is based on how many years the plant's been in the ground. You can get blooms off of a fresh root, 1 year old, in a bag, in sawdust, someplace that you would find someplace else. Or online when you buy them, you're going to pay for the age of the root. The older the plant, the bigger the flower, the more flowers. So we're trying to selectively bring you plants that are hardy enough to give you multiple flowers in any given year. The way that you get flowers out of these plants, there's two common errors that when people are growing these. One is nitrogen. You do not want to give this plant too much nitrogen. If you're mixing your soil with the appropriate amount, which is a third of our mulch, then there's enough nitrogen in there. You want to stay low. And I'll get into what fertilizers to pick and why not in a second or two. But the too much nitrogen causes this to grow too fast, and that'll lean over. And also, when it's in bloom, when you give it nitrogen, on the herbaceous plant, the stems won't be able to handle the weight of the flower. So that'll bend over as well, much like a dahlia. And you buy the different plate dahlias and you have to stake them. And I don't mind staking these because they're so pretty, and not just use some pieces of rebar or some bamboo. I build little rebar cages for some of my plants, and it's not to keep the animals out. I don't like screens and fencing and stuff like that. But I weld, and so I build a cool little cage that just sits over this all year. And when he comes up, I don't have to even tie him to it. They just kind of work themselves up, and they don't fall over. The rest of the plant hides the cage until wintertime. The acid is a mandatory thing for this soil, and especially for peony. So this is my favorite. And fertilizers are one of those things I don't know if they go bad. they don't smell any less if they stay longer, but I try to buy stuff that I am not gonna keep. I will buy a bag of acid and I'll empty it. I take it home with the intent of not having it. I might save a cup or two if I wanna plant something else into the native soil, but our decomposed granite that we call our soil here has a lot of really good nutrients in it. They're just locked up because of the pH and the calcium in the water, and it binds that. When you break that bind, and you're with acid, you're going to soften up clay as better than, in my opinion, better than gypsum, and you'll be balancing out the pH, which is what the peony is like.
And what pH are you looking for?
Well, neutral.
Oh, neutral.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, given that, this is probably a good time to go into some of the chemical reactions that you're going to get here. Do not over-mix mulch in the hole. So if you put too much mulch in the hole, your roots aren't going to, you're going to have dry pockets. If you think potting soil, okay, I'll use potting soil, that's fine in the ground, but you still only want to mix 1/3 to 2/3 native soil. And you're going to have to use that kind of measurement when you dig out. If you're going to put a peony in a hole that's existing that has another plant, you're going to have to take a look at that, what that soil looks like. I always advocate doing a little forensics when you're going to plant something else, where something else was planted, especially if that plant didn't succeed. You want to know if it's holding water. Acid would be good. It'll break up the pH or break up the clay and allow some of your drainage to work better. So you just want to make sure you don't just subject a new plant to what the problem was in that hole. It might not have been the plant that died. It might have been the dirt that killed it. Could be grubs. You would just want to make sure that you're working smart. The other is there's a grub bait. I mix in my yard, I'll mix in fruit trees and things like that, so I'm really sensitive to what I'm putting in the ground as far as toxins go. And one of the grub baits is, you'll find it in the shop, is for fruits and vegetables. And I'll use that if I'm not sure what the problem is and I don't know where I don't have the time to dig that plant up yet or dig around it and find out what it is. I throw some grub bait on it this time of year. They're just voraciously eating the roots of anything that they can get a hold of. The reason you want to be aggressive with grubs is that when they turn into beetles, they don't eat very much. It's all about procreation when they're flying around. And they come back to where they were born and they lay more eggs. That's the cycle. So if you don't kill them when they're in the ground, you're inviting a lot of grubs back the next year or so. They're usually in the top 4 inches or so of the soil, so when you're digging around and you find 1 or 2, just put some grub bait down. So you don't subject your plant to another plant. Don't over mulch or to what was already in the hole. Don't over mulch your soil. Make sure you have a lot of the native soil and sands in there. If you've purchased a home and you think that and digging around, you think that maybe there is too much mulch in these holes. You've been having a hard time keeping the plant wet, even though when you dig in the soil, it's got some moisture in it and stuff like that. Then you can take some sand or some, I'll use our topsoil because it's mostly sand with a little bit of mulch. And I just pour it around the top. It's a great time this time of year when I'm adding fertilizer. Then water that in, and you'll see the mulch stay on top and the sand disappear into the soil, filling in those air pockets that you've created by having too much mulch in the hole. So if you have planted using 50-50, or you wanted to love that plant, you can love them to death, and you just put it in pure potting soil or pure mulch, then come back with some sand and put it on top with your fertilizer and just water it in. And you'll see the sand disappear into those holes, and then it'll give those roots the support that they need.
Perlite? Use of perlite?
What's the question? Perlite.
For air? Do you use perlite for air?
Not in the ground.
No. Okay.
No, I'll use it in my pots.
Okay.
So, quick segue. Yes, you can put peonies in pots. and you want to have a pot that's 2 or 3 times the size that you're buying. So if you're buying a 3-gallon, you want a 6 to 10-gallon pot. Please do not put a bunch of rocks in there or empty Coke bottles because you want to take up space. You don't want to spend the extra $10 on the dirt. Just buy good potting soil. You know, we've made it specifically for the area. It's about as wholesome as you get. Just spend the extra $3 that it takes for another half a bag, fill the thing up with potting soil. When I'm potting anything, I will fill up the pot a certain level, and then I'll put my tube with my potting soil the level that it takes for the plant to sit on. Are you following me? So I cannot have to take it out of its container yet. I put the dirt in there to that level, take it out of its pot, sit it on the dirt, and then fill. And that's a great time at that point to mix some of your fertilizer in so that when you water it, it's not all just coming from the pot, from the top, and you have some at root level. And also, this technique keeps you from filling up the pot with dirt and then digging a hole in that and trying to fit your pot in there. Then you want to plant in a pot where you've got some lip so that you can occasionally come by and fill the whole thing with water and let it soak in slowly. And that's if you know you want a peony and you don't know where you're going to put it, then you put it in a pot. Get it while we've got them, and we have the color that you want, and put it in a pot and keep it for a year or two until you decide where you want to put it. That's a great way to enjoy it while you can. The other question that we have about not so much the difference between the tree, the Ito peony and the herbaceous peony is I've got them, I've had them, the plant looks great, the buds come out, I don't really get any flowers. There's a few things that will cause that. Most commonly is your fertilizer's out of balance. You don't have enough sulfate, which I'll get into in a second, and you don't have enough sunshine. So when you read these labels on the plants, we didn't write them all. They came from the grower. They're a bit, I don't consider them optimistic or exaggeratory. I just think that they're growing them in a perfect environment, and that's what the label represents. Here you can count on the plant being 10 to 20 times shorter than what the label says, because we're not growing them in a perfect environment. Likewise, if they're being grown in Oregon or in Seattle, Washington, Northern California, their direct sunlight is not our direct sunlight. You're at the coast, which is 5,000 feet lower than you are, probably 6,000 feet lower. And you have all of this refractive quality in the sun, where there's so much humidity, the radiation that it takes to grow plants is bouncing off. So stuff that will grow out in the front yard in Washington or Seattle, they need a little bit of break. They need some shade here, some dappled light. Peonies are surprisingly durable. They want 4 at a minimum, 6 to 7 hours of sunshine. And it can be dappled, but a few of those hours have to be intense, direct on the plant for them to bloom properly. The other is your insects. There's these plants sweat a really sweet sap, and you'll see the droplets on the plant. You're welcome to taste it. It's not toxic. I wouldn't save it and add it to your tea or anything, but you know, it is what it is. And that attracts ants. There are some studies that show that ants actually eat some of the other bugs away. So if you've added, now is the time really to put in your ladybugs and stuff like that. So if you've got a ladybug bloom going on in your yard, then you have to be really careful about your toxins because a lot of your sprays are indiscriminate. They just kill bugs. It doesn't matter what kind of bug. But I will do ladybugs, and then I'll be very careful about how I treat the plant. You will get thrip and aphids and ants. It's going to happen almost without fail because of the sap. Now, if you can't stand ants or it's a real problem for you, I would use a diatomaceous earth around the plant. It's a fine, fine dust. It kills anything with an exoskeleton via suffocation. It just gets stuck in their joints and stuff like that. That's how they breathe, and it's non-toxic. Your dog smells it, licks it, or you do, it doesn't make any difference. It's not going to hurt you. But if you're going to go with sprays, then I'm using pyrethrin or one of the spinosades. These, the pyrethrin is a chrysanthemum derivative, and the spinosades are bacterial, and they are very effective. They break down and work into the soil, and they're not going to affect your living soil, and they're not as toxic to humans. But the answer is not that big of a deal. Your thrip are a problem. It's a little early for thrip. The common thing for thrip is leaf curl. They during the evening, cooler hours, they will strip the bark off of the leaf to get the sap, and then when the leaf is growing, it's healing, and it has a curl to it. Think of it like a keloid scar on your body. But once that starts, you really got to get aggressive with it because they'll just spread. And you can spray the plants around it as well. The Ito, when trimming these, the difference between the Ito and the herbaceous is the Ito will have some more of the tree peony quality to it, so it will actually stalk on you. These won't. You want to wait until fall. I trim when they go dormant. I will trim the sticks, leave very few, and then about this time of year when they start coming up, I'm taking off the dead stalks. On the Ito, which has more of a vertical quality to it, you will, when you're trimming in the fall, you'll see nodes along the stalk that will show you how far down to come. It wants to truncate, it wants to stalk up. So if you have the room in your garden for that, then you can allow it. It's not going to hurt the plant if you cut it to the ground, but you have an opportunity to get a taller plant with bigger flowers if you pay attention to that. That's quality that I like. And I have 3 in my yard right now, and I'm just giddy this time of year when they start looking like this. If it's a qualifier at all, the gentleman, Jim, who is the rep for Monrovia, for the state of Arizona, lives up here with us, and he's got 5 in his front yard, and his front yard is just full of deer. And for some reason, I'm not going to tell you that they're deer proof. This is kind of like deer asparagus, you know, it's coming up and it's tender, so you have to be careful with that, but he doesn't seem to have any problem with it, and he's in a neighborhood with no fences. So, and the ones that don't do well, don't produce well, were in his backyard where there were too much shade, and he dug them up and moved them into the sun, and he got flowers. So when you see a plant that's really puny, or if you're just buying a root, just don't expect too much. It's going to be a long time. There's nothing wrong with doing that, but buy quantity and fill it in where you have room in your yard. The other thing I'd like to share with you a little bit about planting them is that you want the acid, of course, but phosphate is known for its flowering. All the stuff in here, down below, that you see it's in bloom, the growing technique is called pushing. And so they have all these nice green plants and mass plants in the greenhouses on drip, and that drip feeds fertilizer. When they want them to come to bloom so they can send them to us so you will buy them, they push, they throttle up the amount of phosphate in the plant, and they just explode. And it's a root food that the side effect is flowers. And that's why when you see a healthy flowering plant, you'll pull it out and there'll just be solid roots. Or it's in a tray and there's more roots coming out of the bottom of the plant. That's the effect of phosphate. Make that point so that when you are planting these, you put some phosphate in the hole. You want them to bloom, and you want them to have healthy roots. Just think of this, it's a tuber, it's just a great big knot of roots. So you want to feed the roots, and this is the safest way to feed the roots. The only time that the roots can work for themselves to bring health to the plant is when the plant is dormant. Otherwise, the roots will grow and they will be productive, but their job is to bring the nutrients out of the plant and feed, bring the water up out of the ground, bring the nutrients up out of the ground to feed the plant. The only time the root can actually work itself is when the plant isn't demanding. It is growing, the roots are growing and helping in the winter. So when the soil is cool is when I like to plant. So up here, the soil's always cool, so you plant any time of the year if it's raised in a pot. Almost any plant, any time of the year. I don't like to dig in the snow, so I miss that. And if I have a personal preference, I'll plant my bigger stuff in the fall. But right now, I'm planting trees in my yard right now. I ordered some cherries and stuff. So that I want to share a little bit with you because a lot of people come up here, build a new house, buy an existing house. They're not familiar with growth cycles or anything like that. Some of this stuff is universal for wherever you're planting and growing. Get some sort of plan. It's nice, thank you for coming in and having an interest in the peony, and get a plan. You know, it doesn't have to be a $10,000 landscape architect plan. It can be your plan.
Sure it does. I'm a landscape architect.
There you go. So we have a landscape architect.
Architect,
but if you have a plan, then what you can do is plant your bigger stuff or stuff that grows. The older it gets, the more attractive it is. You can plant that first, and then you can come back and do sections, and you have a plan. So you know, you don't just, oh, that's beautiful. We love when you're doing spontaneous buying here, because it doesn't do us any good if the stuff stays here, but have a plan so you know, oh, it's finally here, it's in bloom. I know where that goes. It goes in this area, but I'm not working on that yet, but I'm going to get it while it's here. So you're not just willy-nilly planting stuff that looks cool in the yard. You have a plan. Yes, sir?
And I've learned that everything you plant up here tends to have a different personality. That's kind of frustrating for me. I come from Phoenix, and I could set a water system on and have everything watered at the same time. Here you got to kind of babysit. I just planted a peony yesterday, a brand new one I bought here, so I've got to learn how to treat that and when to feed it.
Yep.
I have other.
Well, that's what we're going to get to all of that. We have a guest whose point was about water needs of all the different plants and being very specific about that. So to be able to address that, when you plant something, I'm putting phosphate in the hole and probably acid in the hole. And then I am I'm doing that while I'm mixing my soil. Sometimes it's not convenient to actually mix the soil, so when I've excavated that, I can add mulch, my fertilizers or my soil stimulators and dirt. I'm mixing it kind of as I'm filling it in. I set this down, I get it to where the level doesn't have too much. You don't want the plant to sink, so digging it twice as deep doesn't apply up here. You want it almost the depth that you want it, so that as your soil decomposes and breaks down, the plant doesn't sink. That's especially important when you have grafts on your trees and things like that. But you don't want to bury this plant too deep. You want to plant it at the level that it's at. If you want to add mulch to the top of the plant during the wintertime, as it starts to break through, you can go and move that aside, but you'll cause some rot that you don't want. Then you're backfilling the plant. You're about 3/4 of the way up with my dirt. I'm adding our 744, just a small handful around on top of that dirt, and then I'm continuing to layer up. I soak the plant and the dirt around it, let it set for a little while, then I come back, turn my hose up pretty loud, I get it almost standing water, and I run the hose down in the hole, tapping out the bottom. And what that will do is that'll break apart the root ball hydroponically as opposed to you doing it manually. And I'm not really cutting the roots, especially on the peony, unless it's just a massive ball, totally root bound, because it will keep that swirl habit, and you can fray them a little bit or actually slice some of them, so it causes them to go out. But I'm running my water down in there, tapping out to the bottom of the hole. It'll look like it's boiling a little. That's the sand filling in your air pockets, which is real important. Let that settle, come back, throw a little bit more of the native soil or whatever in those puncture scars, if you will, and let it set for a few days. If you pull water to it, turn it off. I like the twist spouts so that I can adjust. I can go from 0 to 5 gallons an hour at any given time, and that's how I can adjust each plant if I want. And when you buy the round spouts, they're black, and they will say on the bag 0 to 5, 5 to 10, and but you can twist them down where they're closed, or you could open them up so you can add more water to that one particular plant on that line. If you're fortunate enough and you're building the house, you want to put in more than one valve box so that you're not trying to water everything off of one valve box, which is limited probably to 2 stations, an A and a B. And but ideally you have trees, shrubs, and flower plants on different timers. When you first put them in the ground, you want to keep them pretty wet. But overwatering here is very common, especially if you have too much mulch in the hole. You'll get root rot. The soil will warm up a little bit, and you'll have air pockets in there. So be very careful again about how much mulch you're adding to the hole. You have to remember that this is a 100% potting mix. So whatever you're mixing with the soil in there, you're adding that all of this mulch, whatever you're planting, whether it's a tree or whatever. It's on like the perfect soil in there, but they're on drip and in the perfect light and everything else in a growing environment. The other thing that I would consider when you're doing this is what you're going to plant around it. These are really easy if you get the first step right. They're really easy to grow. There'll be springs you think you lost them, and then they'll start coming through the ground. And standing alone, it's, well, there's a dead spot in my yard, but wait, it's going to be peonies, you know? And instead of doing that, you can lace things in, and timing-wise, right now the bees are just coming alive. They're really hungry. They go from quasi-dormant to really needing to feed, and they're looking for anything that's blooming. So I do these dwarf fruit trees. A big one, full grown, is 9 foot. But so they stay little, but the fruit is the same size as a standard tree. The point is they bloom now. So after this guy's played out, you'll see some out here that have already finished, and they have fruit on them. But after he's finished, then this guy is going to get close to blooming. And depending on which species you get, it'll read on the label. Some colors bloom later, some of them bloom earlier. I go with middle or late here so that they're late frost, if we get one, doesn't affect my plants. So middle or late bloomers are the best. I'm into, I don't know, can you see this?
No,
No, that's okay. So when you have, you see this? See the truncation on this? Can you see that? This is a Ito, where he's a little bit woody already coming up. So it's more of a stalk than you find with this, which is the herbaceous or the bush. But I'll put evergreens. So this is going to mirror the shape of the peony, which is a pleasant look. So not to block his sunlight, but these become your backdrop. This is evergreen. When this comes up, the flowers are up against the evergreen. It's thinking about your landscaping, like planting these in front of your deodar cedar, so that when you do a drive-by, you're seeing this stick with all this pink against a dark green backdrop. You want to think about height of your plants. If you look how pretty that is. That's a ground cover. This is maybe 1 foot, 2 foot tall. But if you have that with the right time of the year, these come up out of it. That's a pretty cool look. And then you don't miss them when they go back. It's not the hole in the yard waiting for the peonies to come up. Hawthorn. As you can see, this guy's about ready to explode. The whites bloom a little bit later, but this is an evergreen. And you can have these guys exploding out of the hawthorn. So as these are playing out, this is going to be blooming. And they have similar, most importantly, they have similar water needs. Here you want to deep water. On your smaller stuff that's up here, as it warms up, the stuff will get moved around. Your annuals or your perennials, some of the perennials, you'll see some stuff up here that's labeled perennial, that is perennial for zone 9 and above, or 8 to 10, and we're in a 7, so we're selling it as an annual because it might not make it through the winter. But it should be that these are annuals. Those you want to plant and water probably every 2 or 3 days, especially when we're not getting rain, and then especially if you're in a pot. So you don't want this in the pot that needs a deep watering once every 5 days, once every 3 days. You want to put 5 to 10 gallons of water on this plant every 3 to 5 days. But you don't want a bunch of stuff sitting around it that needs to be watered every other day. You picking up what I'm putting down? Is that clear? So you want to look at not just light, but you want to look at water restrictions or water temperament. And if you do that, then you won't have as much trouble in a container or in the ground. But it takes forethought. That's why I say you have a plan. Then you have maybe your larger bushes or trees that are evergreen, and then you step down to something that's a little bit shorter, and then you have this in front of it. And then you could go with your annuals that give you color all the time. Look how fun this is. This is a Texas sage. Folklore in Texas says that it blooms 3 days before it rains. But it's a lower water need. You can get by with watering it once a week, which you can with these once it's warm. Once you put them in the ground, I don't turn the spigot on until it's drained once really well, and then you can open up your valve for your water. But think of this is going to be 5 to 7 foot tall, so he's going to be up front. This guy can be in the back. This guy can be in the front, and this will come up in between and give you a really wow color. This is going to bloom. There's 3 or 4 different colors of leaves on this, and 3 or 4 different colors of flowers. I'm not sure which one this one is, but oh, it's purple. So great plant for Texas. This is your ever-popper salvia gray guy. I believe this is a hot lips. Yeah. So this will have white and red on the same flower, and it's got a smaller leaf than most of your salvias. Don't be fooled. This is very hardy. It is a 3-foot plant. It's a 3-foot by 3-foot ball of hummingbird and butterfly magnet. It's magnificent, but a little more wispy, a little bit taller than probably these will get, but a really great companion plant. And I was actually able to, yes.
You were going to plant the evergreen or the hawthorn near your planted
Peony.
peony. Thank you. How close can you plant?
So, if I'm going to plant, the question is, if I'm going to plant around my peony, how close do I put them? And it's a great question, but it's really dependent on the water needs of the plant that you're planting around. Because they can go almost in the same hole if they're the same water needs. You're going to turn off most of the water in the winter. I advocate turning off the drip during a particular time, but hand watering because the roots still need water. As I explained earlier, they're working during the winter time, so you don't just turn off all the water. Turning off the water in the winter isn't for the plants, it's to save the drip system from blowing up from the freezing. But to answer your question very specifically, it has to do with what the water needs of the plants are. Make sure the closer they are, the more similar their water needs need to be. So you're not rotting this. These are a lot of fun. I plant these in my yards. This is euphorbia. What you see a lot of euphorbia here is the gopher plant. It's more prostrate and it's green, and when it blooms out the end, which is yellow and some orange. The way you can tell if it's a euphorbia or not, pull a leaf off, they bleed milk. Their sap is milky. It doesn't taste any good to any kind of critter, so they're pretty safe anywhere in the yard. The water needs for this are very similar to the water needs for this. These are evergreen. They get a little spindly when the snows, when 2 feet of snow sits on them, but they spring right back as soon as it warms up. Mine are in bloom right now, and it's kind of, there's a flower on this, you'll be able to see if you can come up and look at it later. It's almost Avatar-esque. It's just a really neat, out of this world sort of blooms. Nothing eats them, and they can take 2.5 feet of snow. I had them in my yard off Copper Basin, and they were amazing. Yes.
Do you cut them all the way down?
I don't.
Just
Do I cut the euphorbia down? I don't. When I cut them back severely after they bloomed. They're one of the first things to bloom. Mine are in bloom right now. And they get a little spindly when their blooms get heavy. But it's sort of an extension of the plant. And after it's kind of played out, I'll just whack them. And then they'll come back real strong. If you want to do something that's a little bit more southwest, this is your sage, not to be confused with the edible sages. This is a hardwood shrub, and or woody shrub. This is your hasperilla or red yucca. There's whites in this. There's pink. There's fire engine red. That's a cool look. For that to come up in between, this stays green. It looks just like this in the middle of the winter. That's a great looking plant for mixing those with. Covered pots, hanging baskets, not so much. On your lavenders work good. Some of your as far as a companion plant, some of your lavenders are less cold hardy than others. Some will, in the winter, they'll just freeze back to the ground. But it's a great companion plant to grow almost in the same hole. They like to go a little bit dry, deep water, as opposed to more water or water frequently. That's the most common dilemma that we have up here is watering. And it's not a water problem. It's kind of like a joke amongst the employees. I water them all the time, okay? Well, you might be watering them too much. It's really easy to love plants to death up here. Put too much good stuff in the hole, and then you put too much water on it. So, this is another spreader, but this is taller. And again, you can have 5 or 6 different conifer evergreens that aren't the same plant in your yard. But you have to pay attention to whether or not you're fenced. Some of the evergreens, the deer and javelina love. The arborvitae is one, for example. It's got a flat leaf to it, and you will, now that I've said this, you'll notice it's the one who is a little bit more vertical, and it will always be trimmed about 3 feet up in people's yards. Or they'll have wrapped a fence around it because the deer and the javelina love. If they can't find anything else, they'll leave it arborvitae. Questions?
Yes. The soil drainage up here, there's a lot of clay where it doesn't drain. What's the best preparation to plant a plant that needs better drainage into that kind of material?
So good, that's common. The question is about soil drainage up here and the clay and how to handle that if you're going to put something. Any of these don't want to be standing in water. So you find out where that pan is first. there's, you'll be able to recognize it when you dig the holes. That's why I encourage you to do forensics when you pull something up that didn't do well, because that's what you might find, is that you dug a bowl in the clay and it's just sitting in there wet. And you'll be able to tell when you get to that point, because it will stink like rotten wood. Depending on where you're at, you will have veins of clay, or you can have a whole pan of clay. You can have a pan of clay that's gone hard, that's only an inch or so thick. This is real common out in the Granite Oaks area, where you're digging down and all of a sudden or even if you're using an auger, it just starts bouncing, and you break through that, you're back down to sandy soil. But commonly, people will use gypsum. Gypsum works, and it works for several different reasons. One of the reasons why it works is because the acid, gypsum, when it breaks down, becomes sulfuric acid. And when that blows apart the molecular structure of the clay and loses the soil, it tends to have a lifespan to that, and the clay comes back together. The clay is really the decomposed granite continuing to decompose, rub together and decompose until you get this dust, and the dust with the calcium and the pH locks up and becomes the clay. What I use is the humic acid. This works better and it's a little bit more permanent, so you're not waiting for the gypsum to break down, you're going straight for the acid. And if you want that effect, don't buy the liquid humic acid. You want the stuff that supports it, the granular, the black material in there, we refer to as a soil activator. It's not a fertilizer, but your plants will look like they're fertilized. The pH in the plant will be balanced out, and the pH in the soil will be balanced out, which releases the minerals. The plant can then pick up the minerals more effectively. And you won't burn your plants if you mix the fertilizer with it. Yes, sir?
Yeah, what about use of lime in that same application?
I don't
break down
use
the
of lime.
caliche.
I don't, the best way to figure that out, it's not a universal thing, the best way to figure that out is to get a soil sample and get it tested and find out what's causing the issue. But lime is not one that is lime is a product of burnt calcium or limestone that's been cooked, or marble that's been cooked, becomes lime. And mixed with fat, you have some.
But that'll also help break down caliche.
It may, I don't know that for
Yeah,
sure.
it does.
So, yeah, because I'm not that familiar with it, what happens is the reason we carry a gypsum is because it's kind of a universal use. And people say, well, my dad always put gypsum in it and it worked. Okay, so we'll bring it in. We haven't had that experience with lime, so it's geographically different things work. And speaking geographically to the clay, you can be in areas where you are just solid rock. What we don't have is forest litter. This place that didn't have many trees, it's really hard to find a 200 or 300-year-old tree. When we finally settled the area and quit cutting the timbers for building things, before we got here, everything burnt on a regular basis, and what didn't burn, the buffaloes ate. So we don't have 1,000 years of forest litter like you would coming from Northern California or Washington State or parts of Colorado. You just have decomposed granite in its different stages. Some of the forest is 50, 60 years old and you have litter there. That brings me to the other, before I get off something too far, with your clay, and you have any kind of topography, what I have done successfully is I dig my hole, and if I think I've got clay, then I'm putting water in there, and I'm seeing how long it takes to percolate for the water to dissipate. Couple problems could be, if you put it in there and it just immediately runs through, you might actually have some big boulders underneath there that have air pockets in them that's just taking the water right away. That hole's going to be a problem. But if you have any kind of topography to that hole and it's in a vein of clay, then go on the low side and essentially build a French drain into that, like a spout on a pitcher. You want a way for the water to escape. So a little bit lower than the bottom of the hole, but not the size of the hole. You can carve down so that the water is allowed to escape following the gravity of the soil, and then backfill again with a good combination. If you're adding, when you're making your own soil, you have the humeric or humus or mulch material, and you have sand, and you have clay. That's how you make it. Well, the clay doesn't stay clay when you have all that stuff that's breaking down, but because it's got so much nutrients in it in such a dense space, while it breaks down when you mix it into the soil, it really helps with the value of the dirt. But you don't add it as a separate layer to the dirt. Yes, sir.
That sounds like a good,
The acid is, I
yeah.
buy a bag and I empty it twice a year. The other thing that I do with the phosphate is twice a year. And I will put phosphate on everything because it feeds the roots in the fall. I throw it on the ground around the tree and I water it until it disappears. And then in the spring, before everything starts coming out, I give it another dose of phosphate on everything that's going to flower. And I retain a little bit to put on my flower beds because I have some that are, peonies surrounded by other blooming things. It's nothing but flowers. I plant so that there's something in bloom all year long if I can help it, so that the hummingbirds and butterflies have something to eat in the winter, and I'm not hanging up sugar water, which I don't mind that you do that. Just be careful with it. This is designed for that. This plant food is designed for that. I want to talk about this for a second, but this 744, as you can see, the numbers are the fertilizers. It's a universal code. Nitrogen, phosphorus, and potash. And what they would teach you as kids is up, down, all around. So when you buy, say you're going to buy peonies today or two and put them in big pots. Buy our soil or buy a soil that is not impregnated with fertilizer. Miracle Grow 15 years ago or so, there was an argument that Miracle Grow thought we were fighting them, people that were in the horticultural schools, and were mad at them for some reason. The reason, it's not it, we were just petitioning them to try and get them to make a fertilizer that worked for places where the pH is out of whack, which they have yet to do. But you buy something that has already got 10-10-10 in it. Well, that's too strong a nitrogen for peony. It's going to be a chemical-based fertilizer instead of an organic-based fertilizer. And when something goes wrong with the plant, it's really hard to diagnose what you need to add because there's fertilizer in there breaking down at different levels. So it's just difficult. And with the alkalinity and the calcium in our water, you don't want to leaf feed with Miracle Grow because it has a tendency to burn the leaves. So it's just something that it's sad that somebody that big wouldn't build something. So what a lot of us have done our own thing and made fertilizers that work. Because you don't have the retention, you don't have as much mud, if you will, in our soils, and your water is always adding out of balance pH and always washing away what the plant doesn't eat. We do a lighter fertilizer that's organic-based, 744, and we feed quarterly. So that is set up to walk around and throw broadcast underneath your plant quarterly. And then if you need something, then you can bring in something for that specific plant. Calcium nitrate. Calcium makes all of your fruits and vegetables sweeter, I have found. And as it breaks down, it turns into nitrogen. So great for tomatoes, not so good for peonies, right? Adding phosphate, which is the center number, to a peony or anything that's a fruit tree, something that needs extra root growth, perfectly fine. You have your flower bed, an annual bed, or a color spot in your yard that you like to trade out periodically. If you want it to keep blooming, hanging baskets are a perfect example. The term pushed, these are pushed to this extreme, and you take this home, it's got lots of vermiculite in this potting soil. It's not meant to hold moisture. So as you're watering it, this guy continues to bloom, you're rinsing out the phosphate while the plant is eating it. Pretty soon you end up with a really pretty green basket of nothing, of no flowers, or very few. And it's like, what happened? Well, you rinsed all the phosphate out of the soil. So about a week or so after you get a plant like this, you start feeding it. And the easiest way to do that is with something that's soluble. So there's I don't see, I didn't bring it up. Oh, here it is, the flower power. This is one of the few chemical flower fertilizers that we have and that we make. But the center number is your phosphate. This is 48 in the center. So it's about as much phosphate as you can get to dissolve. And it's got a 12 on the nitrogen, so you're going to keep your green plant, you're going to keep it growing. I cheat, I use this periodically on my fruit trees because I want to give it some nitrogen and some phosphate real quick. Result, because it's liquid as opposed to the granule, because you don't have a bunch of decomposed product in the ground. I call them carbohydrates for the roots. We developed this. It's Root and Grow, which is real light, 2-2-1, but it looks like chocolate syrup. And this is so benign in that it's not chemically harsh. It's essentially mulch, mostly hops and some other byproducts that you can get readily. That once they're spent, what do you do with them? And they just boil it down to tea. And but I mix this with water. There's instructions on here. Most of everything I follow, the instruction to the T. I go a little bit lighter so I don't burn things. This I don't even measure. I just blup, 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 that's and fill up a 5-gallon bucket. And pour it on everything. I pour it on stuff that I first plant. I put it on the new plants a week later. And then I just, if we go through a really tough spell and where it's real dry and hot and windy, that's the magic combo for stress, I'll give my plants some room. And that'll just kind of reinvigorate them and give them the carbohydrates that the plant needs to be able to fight off the stress. The best support mechanism or deterrent to your pests, your bugs, and your diseases, your resilience of the plant is the health of the plant when they come, because they're going to come. The boring insects are easy to see the damage on the pines. Well, they're always there. The pine's natural defense is sap. So something bores into it and the plant suffocates that critter with its sap. When it's been so dry and lacking of nutrients that it doesn't have any sap, the boring insect wins. Your conifers, when they start to show stress, they can be very close to being gone. It's not unusual to be driving past a tree and you think, oh, he looks a little puny, and a week later he's just dead. And that's because the disease won because the plant wasn't healthy. The other thing that you have to be careful about when you're picking stuff, this is a 60-year-old family-run business, and there's someone from the family here all the time. And they've gone through great lengths to contract the growers that grow the right stuff. We send stuff back. We're known as the picky guys. We won't sell it if it doesn't work, if it's not for the area. If it's not for the area and it's a unique piece, we clearly label it. But if you buy it here, it's going to grow here. The annuals have a lifespan, but your trees, it's not like you have to worry about what zone or anything like that. You're solidly in a zone 7. We've gone through great lengths to make sure that the stuff that's sent here grows here. And I go through that explanation not as a pat on the back, it's kind of a security thing for you, but to emphasize that we have indigenous plants, but those plants never knew the wild. So this is a common thing. I bought this plant and it grows here. I've never had to water the one that was sitting next to it because it was here when I built the house. I stuck it in the ground. I didn't water it since the time I planted it, and it's dead. Well, you just told me why it died. Because it's just because it's indigenous by the species doesn't mean that it can make it like everything else. And it also has to do with where it was grown, which we go through great lengths to do. Many of the cactus can handle our climate. But if you buy it from a grower in Phoenix, was born and raised in zone 10, it doesn't know zone 7. It doesn't know winter. And so they will go to mush. Tucson has elevation. They've got cactus farms on the side of Mount Lemmon almost at our elevation, so they can handle a zone 7. There's high plains desert growers up here that we buy our stuff from that we have, much like the Hascarilla and some of the Apothecia, which is the prickly pear, and hedgehogs that will make it up here. So just be careful of where it's grown. If you find it, if somebody's bulldozing a lot and they turn over some plants, that's probably the best place to rescue because they're born and raised here. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so does Monrovia Nursery, their primary growing location is Azusa, California, which is a 10A, 10B. Do they have other growing?
I don't know 10HMB.
10 USDA 10A, 10B. That's
Oh,
Azusa,
okay.
California.
Yeah.
Okay. Miles Rosedale, Monrovia Nursery used to be Rosedale Nursery.
Yeah.
Miles Rosedale was a good friend of mine, his kids. And Monrovia Nursery is now predominantly, and that's the only place I know, is in Azusa, California. Do they have?
Oh no, they probably
other
have growing farms. The question is Monrovia in its original location in California, growing stuff for zone 7. They have Oregon, Colorado.
Okay.
They've got growers all over,
Okay.
and we've probably got a 30-year relationship with them.
Yeah.
And as I said, the guy who reps the state for Monrovia lives in Prescott, and so we actually get pickled with that. If it's got a Monrovia label on it, he's seen it. He's made sure we got the right thing for the place. So, and I think we're done. Unless you've got more for me, what's our time look like?
That's about perfect.
All right.
You mentioned the sign-up sheet.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. If there's information, this is recorded, of course, and you'll be able to see it whenever they let it go. And if you want more information about ordering plants or what we've got in stock, what's coming in, and just tips on growing things, make sure you give us your email address on this clipboard. If you're already getting things, then you're already in, right? Thank you. I'll be here most of the day.